is there a possibility that the definition of hate speech metastasizes and broadens in such a way to serve very particular silencing objectives, right? Where there's a certain suppressive effect on desired groups by categorizing as hate speech, even commentary, op-eds, etc., that ask questions related to topics that are deemed sensitive or offensive, fill in the blank, to a particular group. So what are the stakes? And then what do you think things might look like 3 to 5 years from now?
The stakes are really huge because they go to the question of where we're going to talk to each other, what we're going to say to each other, and how politics is going to interface with the online universe. And the online universe is not going away. It's going to continue to be, in expanded ways, the central way that we communicate about tons and tons of subjects. So the stakes couldn't be higher. And they're really high on both sides. They're high for people, broadly speaking, on the left who are worried that January 6th style extremism could go from being peripheral in the United States to mainstream with dire consequences for democracy. And they're consequential to people on the right who are worried, as you were sort of hinting, that principles of limiting speech to avoid what counts as quote unquote hate speech or political correctness could actually impede public debate and discourse in a way that's really destructive, because it means that certain points of view can't be heard. And if they can't be heard, then they're delegitimated and then potentially harmed. So the stakes are huge, and they're huge on both sides. Can the definition of hate speech be expanded in a way to suppress certain political points of view? Not only is the answer yes, but that's really why the concept of hate speech was invented in the first place. In especially Germany, but elsewhere in Europe after World War II, in the aftermath of the rise of Nazism, lots of moderate centrist people thought, wait, what went wrong in our society? Germany had a liberal constitution in the 1920s, and it had all kinds of economic problems and had all kinds of struggle between different political parties, but it had a nominally ordinary liberal constitution. And in that environment, communists were able to express their views, Nazis were able to express their views, and ultimately that liberal democracy failed and was replaced by the Nazi state. And so centrist moderates said, we really need to rethink the idea that free speech lets you express all kinds of views, including Nazi views, because people might believe those views. And so the idea of prohibiting certain kinds of speech, certain kinds of hate speech, was based on the worry that in Europe, it could happen here, because it had just happened there, that kind of talking had led to action and had led to the collapse of constitutional government. So the whole point of outlawing certain kinds of hate speech was to prohibit certain kinds of political views from gaining the kind of foothold that would lead them to take power. It was different in the US. In the US, the free speech movement in the 20s tended to take the view, in the 30s, tended to take the view that Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., one of the most famous Supreme Court justices, took, where he said, listen, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, so there are some limits. If you're about to overthrow the government in the next few moments, yes, we can shut you up. But he said, if through calm, reasonable conversation, the ultimate effect of speech is to bring about, he said, the dictatorship of the proletariat, a victory of Soviet-style communism, he said, I think my job is to let that happen. That's his most extreme formulation in favor of free speech, but it's damn extreme, and he said it in a Supreme Court opinion. And so that was the kind of absolutist view that said, as long as you're not about to imminently cause violence, you can say whatever you want, and if that undermines our political norms, that's fine. So from that point of view, from that Holmesian point of view, in the US, we really shouldn't want it to be the case that prohibitions on hate speech end up really limiting what you can say in public. That's the kind of strong pro-free speech view. The worry is, are we in a place where Germany was in the 20s? Is January 6th the kind of historical event that shows you that there's a genuine risk that people could try to overthrow the government of the United States? And, as more details come out, not just about January 6th, but about Donald Trump's various efforts to try to reverse the outcome of the election, there is a point of view that says that's not so crazy. Our democracy maybe is in greater danger than it's been at in the past, and maybe for that reason, speech should be limited. So I think what's hardest about this problem is a lot of what you think depends on how you assess our real world situation. Do you actually believe that we're in danger of enough people getting on board with dangerous, bad, crazy ideas and breaking our democracy that you need to do things like deplatform Donald Trump? Or do you think, look, we're fine? Sure, January 6th was terrible, but that was only a relatively small number of people, and Donald Trump didn't succeed in overthrowing the outcome of the election, and we shouldn't mess with our basic free speech norms, which have served us so well until now. So that leaves the question of the base case. To me, the most probable outcome is that we continue to have a pretty robust system of private actors, including newspapers and social media platforms and others, limiting speech pretty extensively. But we also have some other social media actors, whether it turns out to be Twitter or some startup social media entity, that have totally different rules, that are much closer to ordinary free speech rules, that are much closer to the idea that you can say whatever you want. And then we would get a more expanded ecosystem in which, if you really want to say something to a lot of people, you're going to find some venue in which you can say it. And my guess is, again, more probable than not, that if the market does that, the courts will then back away from speculating about maybe whether they should step in to intervene and limit and allow a limitation of what these social media companies do. And that's because I just don't think it's sustainable in the long run that half or even 35% of the public is supporting someone for president, and that person has no major social media outlet. I just don't think that's practically probable or realistic. Either the social media outlets or some social media outlets will shift to allow that kind of speech, or new social media outlets will come into existence, or someone will buy one of the existing ones and flip it. So in those scenarios, there will be some mechanism for all kinds of speech to get out there. And then the US will probably ultimately preserve at least the core of our free speech tradition, probably. But that's just the base case. You could imagine it going the other way, in that you could imagine the government intervening and saying we're going to have much more aggressive requirements passed by state legislatures or others that say that the social media companies can't silence hate speech. And then what would happen is we would sort of go back to Internet 1.0, where you really could say anything you wanted somewhere on the internet, and you could be as nasty as you wanted, and you could be as dangerous as you wanted. No one could really do anything about it. So that is also a possible scenario that could potentially emerge. It may be that the social media platforms, with their central dominance over so much of our speech, will turn out to have been an artifact of a certain moment in the history of the web, a Web 2.0 moment. And in a Web 3.0 moment, maybe they just won't matter as much, even if they continue to use the kinds of content moderation standards that they presently have.